Hello and welcome back to Season 13, Episode 20 of the Ubuntu Podcast. Today we are going to be discussing the proliferation of recent Ubuntu remixes. We have some gooey love and all your wonderful feedback. And joining me this week, as ever, are Mark.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm a bit warm, but overall, all things considered, I'm doing quite well.
Yes, it is a bit warm. And Alan, how are you and are you warm?
I am tickety-boo and I am warm.
So we are agreed that in the south of England, it is somewhat warm at the moment.
I'm expecting that bottle of Club Mate on your windowsill to bubble up and boil over at some point with the sun.
It's been there for 4 years now.
Oh my gosh.
It's because it tastes awful and you wouldn't dare drink it.
No, it is proper. It's Club Ubuntu Mate, in fact. I was given this at an UbuCon in 2016, and it's Club Mate with nicely decorated with a whole bunch of Ubuntu stickers.
Oh.
What have you been up to this week, Martin?
I have been building Monster Joysticks.
Are these very big joysticks?
Yeah, like monster trucks, like gigantic tyres on them.
Well, one of them is simply called a Monster Joystick, and the other one is called a Monster Joystick Mini. So they are joysticks made from, they're custom, so you can go to monsterjoysticks.com to find out more. The mini joystick, it is designed to plug into old 8-bit computers using an Atari D-port connector. So my Commodore 64s. And the Monster Joystick has a Raspberry Pi inside it. And it then hooks up all of the joystick and buttons over GPIO, and it is an arcade cabinet inside a joystick enclosure. But the killer feature is this. Monster Joysticks use Sanwa arcade joysticks and buttons, so you get a proper industrial strength arcade quality joystick to play your games on.
So when you say it's an arcade in a box, it's like you just plug in HDMI, chuck an SD card in with RetroPie or whatever, and plug it into a telly, and away you go.
Exactly that. Yeah,
Nice.
So it's a joystick you plug into a telly, and then you start playing your games.
Oh, nice.
That's
And
really
the
cool.
Monster Joystick is like a fighting stick. So it's got 6 buttons on the top, and then it's got 3 buttons around the side for select and start and inserting coins and all of that sort of stuff. They're rather lovely.
Is it like acrylic that you peel stickers off and screw it all together?
Yes, it is. Yes. So it's a bit fiddly to construct. It doesn't require any soldering or anything like that. It's all, pluggable parts, but it is a bit fiddly. But I have to say, worth it. I'm looking forward to the reprise of 8-bit Versus and giving you a run for your money in Daley Thompson's Decathlon, because I've now got a bulletproof joystick that can utterly withstand the rigours of, 1980s joystick wagglers.
If you think that a new joystick is what you needed and not skill, then fair enough.
All the gear and no idea. So, Mark, what have you been up to?
I have been playing Red Alert.
What's that?
It's a turn-based strategy with no roguelike elements.
Well done,
Well,
getting that in there.
I don't want to hear about it.
What is Red Alert? I've heard of it. Is this a Command and Conquer thing?
Yes, so I spoke a few weeks ago about playing the Command and Conquer Remastered Collection, and I was playing the original Command and Conquer game. Well, as well as that game, it also comes with Red Alert, which is the sequel, prequel, parallel universe game that
Parallel universe.
Well, it's not exactly clear. They kind of retconned some stuff into the storyline there, which made it not make a lot of sense. But essentially, there's the Command and Conquer storyline and the Red Alert storyline. There's each a series of games which are kind of similar but different. But basically, so Red Alert is an alternative history where Einstein goes back in time and kills Hitler, and therefore you're fighting an alternative World War II between the Allies and the Soviets. And you can pick either side.
Wow. That's quite the storyline.
It is quite the story. The thing is, Westwood real-time strategy games all focused very heavily on being cinematic as well as being games. So you have like fully acted cutscenes, and some of it's, a bit hammy. But a Red Alert in particular is quite good in terms of you feel like you're playing through a story as well as playing an RTS. Like what I found remarkable going back to it after so many years and having just played Command & Conquer is how much better a game it is than Command & Conquer. Like each level that you play in single player mode feels very much like you're playing a bit of a story, even though it is a sort of, a build a base and build a load of tanks and go and kill the enemy.
And back in time, how much time was there between the first game and the second game? How long before Red Alert came along?
I think it was somewhere between 2 and 4 years. I can't say off the top of my head. I mean, okay. the engines look very similar at the time. It's the same sort of graphics, but and it was also the same with Red Alert 2 and Command & Conquer 2 was that you could see there were a lot of similarities in the engines, so they appeared to be sort of co-developed to some extent. But yeah, it's just remarkable how much better it is as a game to play like as a single player thing. And yeah, it's been really fun revisiting it.
I have to say, I didn't know what the plot was, but now I do. I think I might give that a go. That sounds like fun. Well, with all of that joystick and Red Alert chat, let's get on with the rest of the show. So, this week we are going to discuss the recent proliferation of Ubuntu remixes. And I suppose we need to start with Alan. What is an Ubuntu remix?
So a remix is where you take Ubuntu and then you fiddle with it in some way and make something new. And there are other terms that we use which are slightly different. So there's a remix, a flavor, and a derivative. And from our perspective, a remix is something we expect at some point probably wants to be a flavor, but it doesn't have to. But it's very clearly built on Ubuntu, built with Ubuntu, but could become potentially a flavor in the future. Whereas a flavor is something that's built using packages from the archive, primarily. So all the flavors that you already know and love, Ubuntu, Kubuntu, Lubuntu, Xubuntu, they're built from packages that are in the Ubuntu archive, using canonical infrastructure. That's a flavor. And then a derivative is like someone who takes Ubuntu and makes something completely different. So you would think of Linux Mint, Pop OS, Zorin. They're derivatives. Yeah, they've got their own branding. They've got their own style guide. They maybe have their own app store. They're like something very different. But underneath it all, there's bits of Ubuntu. So we're talking about remixes where they're very close to Ubuntu and they're not official. They don't have to be. Mm-hmm. They can just be something someone threw together in a weekend and it's just a bit of fun for someone to play with.
So the remixes that we're referring to this evening are the Ubuntu Cinnamon remix, which is obviously Ubuntu with the Cinnamon desktop, Ubuntu Unity remix, which is a reimagining of Ubuntu with the Unity desktop, and then Ubuntu DDE remix, which comes with the Deepin desktop.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't you have a remix, Martin?
Yes, it's wonderful. Although I haven't released any images yet. So we spoke about that in the last show.
Yeah.
And maybe by the time you listen to this, I will have gone back in time and produced some images that people can download and put on their Raspberry Pi.
So I tried these out in VMs because I wanted to have a look at them. I'm pretty stuck in my ways and I tend to use default Ubuntu with GNOME. I do flick around with a few other things and I try stuff out on other laptops. So I tried out Ubuntu Cinnamon remix, and I guess the appeal of this is for people who are familiar with Cinnamon on Linux Mint but want to be closer to Ubuntu and don't necessarily want the other changes that you get with Linux Mint but want to stick with something that's built from Ubuntu pure rather than lots of modifications like Linux Mint do. So I installed that, and I think the best word I can use is ginger. It's very ginger in color.
Quite orange.
Yeah, it's cinnamon coloured, I guess. And it uses the Calamares installer, which Lubuntu also uses. And I think Maybe one of the other flavors uses. I can't remember which one.
The Deepin also uses Calamares for the installer.
Right. And I tried 2004 and it installed perfectly fine. It ships Cinnamon 4.4.8. I've got no idea. I don't know the lineage of
me either.
Cinnamon and how new or old it is. And it had a bunch of apps you'd expect and some pretty sane defaults. It seemed like a pleasant environment. And if you're a fan of Cinnamon, it seemed like a good place to start, really.
Yeah, I mean, I gave these a quick test drive as well. I've obviously been aware of them for some months now, but it's the first time I've actually sat down and installed them. And I wouldn't say used extensively, but definitely used enough to create some initial first impressions. We'll cover each of them in some cursory detail, but I have to say I quite liked Ubuntu Cinnamon, and something that I immediately did was Control-Alt-T and was delighted to see that a terminal appeared. I mean, in the words of Ted Gould, who used to work at Canonical, Control-Alt-T should be an ISO standard.
Yeah, I had a noodling around in Cinnamon, and it's pretty quick. Even though this was running in a VM on my laptop, and obviously I've got loads of other stuff running, it felt pretty sprightly, and I was quite pleased by that. And I can see why Cinnamon has an appeal to people, because it has some of the feel of an older desktop in that, you've got a panel down the bottom of the screen, but it has the feeling of a slightly more modern desktop, a little bit like Windows 10, where you hit a button and you've got an expanded menu. It's not just a list of applications like you would expect to see on something like Ubuntu or maybe on XFCE. Some of those menus seem to be quite stunted and very, very, very retro. And this felt like a nice compromise between the old world and the new world. And it was nice and quick, and it had some sensible applications pre-installed. It seemed okay. So yeah, I was okay with it. I didn't Control-Alt-T, but I'm glad to see that was that's your benchmark for a good Linux distro, isn't it?
It is. Based on my experiences of the early bootstrapping of Ubuntu Mate, I couldn't understand why so many people were so incensed that I hadn't implemented Control-Alt-T. And I didn't understand why that was so important to people at that time. I'm now wedded to that particular key combination. So yeah, it was one I tried out because it illustrates to me the level of attention whoever put the remix together is showing to, the Ubuntu community and the ecosystem and the expectations of the other flavors that have come before. So the next one I tried was Ubuntu DDE, the Deepin variation. What did you make of that?
I've heard lots of things about Deepin. I've never really run it in anger, and I thought it was quite pretty. I liked the fact that when I booted it, I got punched in the face with two options, a little choose your own adventure that detected that I was running this in a VM, and it said, do you want, rubbish mode or do you want bling mode? And, I chose, I don't know what they were called. They weren't called rubbish and bling. They were called probably normal and
reduced, I think.
Okay. And I chose the lower one because I figured I'm in a VM. But even though I did that, it still looked quite pretty. It looked very much like Mac OS, like with the when I say look like Mac OS in terms of the panel being centered in the middle at the bottom, the kind of the way you would expect a Mac to look. It also uses the Calamares installer, like you said, like Cinnamon, and the strap line I saw, was this on the website, I think, where it says Ubuntu with the most beautiful desktop environment, or it might have been in the installer, actually. I think the installer actually made that claim. And yeah, I could believe that. I could believe if you're the kind of person who likes beauty, you could see that Deepin is quite pretty. So yeah, I can see why people would like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was very impressed. The initial impressions, I liked the sound theme. They have lots of sort of distinctive sounds to signify the system booting, logging out, shutting down, and all the rest of it. And I was quite taken with all of that.
I must have had mine muted because I didn't hear any of these.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah. So I was quite taken with that. But I've always liked Deepin because it seems like quite a departure from what we expect when we see a Linux distribution. You know, the design and implementation of the Deepin desktop environment is quite distinctive, and I really quite like the look of it. And also Control-Alt-T worked in Ubuntu Deepin, so I was very happy to find that. Yes, 10 points out of a possible 9. Well done. And then we tried Ubuntu Unity.
Yeah. This, so I've been a Unity fan for, a long time. Mm-hmm. And I used it in anger on my main machine before I worked for Canonical. And then, after I started working at Canonical, Unity was my desktop of choice. I really enjoy using Unity. I have it on my X220. And bearing in mind the X220 is getting a bit long in the tooth, it is so fast. When you press the super key, the menu appears super fast. And when you use the navigation to move workspaces, they fly so fast. And the animations they just feel instant. They're happening straight away, which is something that I don't feel other modern desktops get right yet. But Unity did. And so I was quite pleased to see that this remix existed. And I, again, chucked it on a VM, and it was very much like seeing an old friend, because it's very familiar to me, and I used it for such a long time. It did freak me out initially because when I first booted it, it gave me a load of text on the screen, and it was actually doing an FSCK kind of thing. And I think it was the new checker that checks the integrity of the ISO. I think it didn't display properly, and that freaked me out initially. I thought, I've got a dodgy download, but actually I just left it alone and it booted fine.
Yeah, so I saw that you'd encountered that issue, but when I ran through it, I didn't see that at all. It worked just fine for me.
Weird. And we're both using the same emulator as the same VM.
I was using QEMU.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, okay.
Weird. It has a tasteful take on the Felicity wallpaper.
They all were using the same, taking their cues from upstream Ubuntu with their mascot branding, which was lovely to see.
Yeah. I like the understated one in DDE, where it just has a little Felicity in the bottom right-hand corner, rather than like occupying the front and center in the middle of the desktop. With the Unity one, it uses Ubiquity, the usual installer for Ubuntu desktop. Other than that, it was very true to the original Unity. Very familiar, very easy to just immediately start using. So if you're a Unity fan, it's great because you can install a modern supported version of Ubuntu with the no longer supported Unity desktop on top. It's great. I would highly recommend it.
Yeah, so this was the one I spent the longest amount of time playing with because there's that familiarity. So I know what to go looking for in the corners of it to see, like, how true is this to, like, Ubuntu as it was. The other thing I noticed is it's not just true to the Unity experience as it was, but they've also taken cues from like modern Ubuntu. So you've mentioned, using Ubuntu, but also the Plymouth Boot Splash is the new style boot splash that they've rebranded with their own logo, which was good to see as well. And it does have elements of Yaru and some other icons, and I have to be honest, I did have to switch it to the ambience theme for it to actually feel like, Ubuntu Unity. But I kind of loved this one. And you say not supported, but not supported by Canonical or the desktop team anymore, but supported by the community. Khurshid Alam has been doing a load of work on this for years, to sort of, keep it current and maintain compatibility with new libraries and components that are coming into the Ubuntu sort of corpus of software via, uplifts in GNOME and what have you. And also Control-Alt-T was supported. So
of course,
it's a gold standard pass mark there.
What I find interesting is the Ubuntu Unity Remix really is, going back to what Ubuntu was 5 years ago. It's the same software. It's yes, okay, there's been uplifts and they've kept it running and they've kept Unity, but it's basically the same, which means Unity does look a little bit dated. When you open the launcher, it can do with a refresh. It would be nice if someone could do that visual refresh at some point.
Yeah, that's the thing that's always like, I know that you can just install the Unity desktop and keep using it, but the thing that's always put me off doing that is the fact that it's not getting the love that it did, when it was the default desktop. You're not getting, shiny new bits each release, even if they were only small. It's just being kept alive, basically.
Yes, in sustaining. Yeah.
And I know if Joe was here, he would tell us new is not always better, but it's nice to have new things going forward. It's nice, especially when you see that the default experience is constantly being refreshed and updated, to know that you're basically stuck in something of a dead end with your experience that's not going to change very much forever is a bit sad.
And that's true of, there are real tangible things that you won't see in there, like the settings panels that have been updated in GNOME Shell that have stuff like fingerprint reader settings and Thunderbolt settings and, all these other things that have moved forward are not fundamental parts of the desktop. They're not like a core part of your activity, but you'd miss them because they're not there. So if you went looking for them, you wouldn't find them. And yeah, you could probably massage and figure out how to get these things in. But because it is in relatively development dead end, you don't get those new things that, some people enjoy, like the fingerprint reader stuff.
Yeah. The main takeaway for me from trying all three of these out is they were all impeccably well presented with their own distinctive look and artwork, and definitely had that, feel of quality that people expect from the Ubuntu flavors. And as they stand right now, all three of these would look the part alongside the rest of the official flavors if, they were part of the, official community of flavors. I was really impressed. And I have to say, good job to everyone involved in creating those remixes.
Yeah, and it's worth noting they are very small teams of people who are creating these remixes. And okay, for Unity, I don't expect there was a tremendous amount of work required because the desktop already existed, was already packaged, and already existed in the archive. So it's not like they had to go and hunt down packages and submit them, to the archive admins or anything. I mean, but it's still an achievement to crank out a release and get it all working anyway. So I didn't want to belittle what they've done. I love it. I think it's fantastic. And this is one thing that I've always loved about Ubuntu is people could take it and remix it and make something new and different with it. And that's still happening 15 years later.
Or something old and familiar. Well, with that, congratulations to everyone involved in those remixes, and I wish you every success in applying to become an official flavour. And with that, we'll move on with the rest of the show.
That GUI love. If there's an app that you've been using that you just have to tell everyone about, email your GUI love to show@ubuntupodcast.org.
So, I have come with my pockets laden with a GUI love.
Oh my. What's your GUI love this week, Martin?
This GUI love is simply called Screen Ruler. And it does exactly what it says on the tin.
It rules your screen.
It's okay. It doesn't do exactly what it says on the tin. But it is a ruler that you can change into different units of measurement, but the default being pixels, and you can orientate either vertically or horizontally, and you can measure things on your screen. And I've been using this for years, but I've been using it an awful lot recently as I've been working on my set designs in OBS Studio and trying to work out if I've got elements in the OBS Studio design correctly aligned and spaced and all the rest of it. So I use this all the time to measure the distance between things in my OBS scenes to make sure I've laid my screen out properly. And I just absolutely love it. It's super simple. You just apt install Screen Ruler. You start it, in the usual ways. You don't have to start it from the command line. And then you line it up with things and make sure they're, the right distance apart or the right size, or if you want to know how thick a border is or whatever. And paired with Stuart Langridge's Magnus, sometimes you need like pixel perfect measurement, and you can overlay Magnus on top to zoom into the area and make sure you're measuring things down to the pixel. It's brilliant.
I actually use something similar to this on Windows, which is called a ruler for Windows, which is very handy. Doing web development, sometimes, I might get a bug reported from a designer that says, can you make this bit this many pixels away from this thing? And so I can put the screen ruler on and I can say, there's that many pixels, and then I can adjust the styling rules until it's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable how useful this thing is, but I love it. I've been using it forever, and I thought, I don't think we've ever talked about it, so I wanted to bring that along.
I noticed the code is hosted on Launchpad, and the most recent release was November 2011.
Yes, it's ancient. I think it's still GTK2.
Right.
But it's just a ruler, right? So it doesn't actually matter because there's no toolkit as such. It's an opaque or translucent ruler that you put on your screen.
Does it support the high DPI or
probably not? Almost certainly not. I've not actually run it on a 4K machine because my panels here are not high DPI, at least on this main workstation.
Nice. Have to give that a go.
I mean, there are variations on this from the KDE community as well. So I think there's one called K Ruler or something like that.
Of course there is.
Other things exist.
Gruler.
Crueler. Oh, yeah, I'm saying it wrong. Right. So there you go. And with that, we will move on. Right, here we go. It is time for all your wonderful feedback. So first up this week, Jason Armstrong emailed us at show@ubuntupodcast.org.
I know there's been some controversy over Snap apps, but I've allowed a Snap of renown into my elementary OS system. I couldn't live without Oh My Giraffe, a fun game my son and I play and laugh with. I don't know what you mean, controversy. Yes, Oh My Giraffe is one of the first things I snapped. I think one of the first games I snapped a long time ago, years ago. I love that game. It's so much fun.
Yeah, so if you haven't played Oh My Giraffe, you can snap install Oh My Giraffe on insert name of your favourite distro here. 50 distros supported. Moving on. Mike Glover emailed us.
With regards to episode 17 and the popularity contest being removed and looking for some form of replacement, what about having it as something you opt into when you're doing a release upgrade? Catching the information before doing an upgrade gives you a better picture of a system which has some mileage on it.
This is true. However, most people install very few applications on their system. So when you aggregate all of that, you end up with the same picture, which is all the default applications are massively popular and everything else is a long tail of irrelevance. And it's also about the infrastructure and the rest of it as well. It's simply, we've not been maintaining it and we're going to not bother to maintain it.
And another thing, I suppose, is especially with LTS releases, systems which have a lot of mileage on it, sometimes they're never upgraded.
Yeah.
Plus, it was turned off. So even though this thing was installed, it wasn't actually doing anything unless you actively went and edited a text file and said, yes, I want to collect this data and send it.
And even if you did that, the back end was so decrepit it wasn't reliable.
Right.
So Eric Nance emailed us about data collection.
Are there any plans to open source the anonymized data sources that drive the user report dashboard at ubuntu.com/desktop/statistics? I'm a data scientist at my day job, and my spare time I love creating visualizations and summaries with the R language using open source datasets, and this would be a great set to create some innovative visualizations.
As far as I'm aware, there are no plans to make the raw data available because it potentially discloses commercially sensitive information. Kevin Ratcliffe emailed us about inclusive language in the Linux kernel.
That's an interesting bias when you say there is a vocal minority against the change, when surely the vocal minority are the project leaders making the changes nobody asked for. You just have to look at the voting ratios on the register comment section for public opinion on this matter. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't people who comment on the register the vocal minority that was being referred to here?
Yes. And also, I don't know that nobody asked for this change. Necessarily. It might be that that's not something you may have seen, but I don't think it's necessarily nobody asked for this.
Right. And I'd also like to point out that it's the project leaders making this decision, not people who are not part of the project, not invested in it and not contributing to it on a regular basis. It's no good being a register commenter and feeling like you have some say over how a project is governed and managed.
It's also important, like talking about bias, it's important when interpreting bias, this is looking at one website's commenters, that's a particular group of self-selecting people. To get a non-biased opinion, you would have to go out and ask people who aren't going themselves and posting on particular websites.
Cyrus Eckenberg emailed us.
In a recent episode, Alan discussed using events to fill out government forms. My experience filling out government-issued PDF forms on Linux comes from my involvement in a third political party here in the States. Having tried all of the open source options I could find, I finally settled on using Master PDF Editor, a proprietary software that is available for Linux. Not my favourite solution, but workable.
Good to know there's other options.
Yeah. So we've been using that at home as well. My wife does some voluntary work for the Scouts organisation, and she needed to clip bits out of past financial reports to collate them. And that was what I found that enabled her to do that effectively. It's a pretty decent bit of software, actually.
I made the mistake of trying to re-edit one of the documents, and I didn't realise what I'd done is after I'd filled it all in, I did a file print to PDF, and then I later opened that PDF and tried to edit it, and that was not going to work. So, yeah. Whoopsie.
Damon Lynch emailed us.
Have you discussed the conflict between having a rigorous QA process for SRUs on the one hand, absolutely vital for Canonical, and putting out bug fixes for volunteer-driven FOSS projects in the distribution on the other, whose project maintainers have limited time? I'm one such maintainer. My project is Rapid Photo Downloader. I've been trying to get a partially broken package fixed in Ubuntu 2004 since May. Of course, snaps are meant to resolve problems like this, but I had to pause my attempts of putting out a snap after running into difficulties. They're probably not insurmountable difficulties, but again, the issue is is time. So, I'd love to help you sort out the problem with your snap, obviously. I don't know what the problem is with the package in the archive. I don't know the specifics.
He did send us a link to the bug report, and it looks like there's basically an issue with the package, and because it's in the LTS, it would have to be a stable release update. Is that the right term?
Mm-hmm.
Which requires some justification when what he's trying to do is just, fix a thing that's broken and doesn't have a lot of time to go through.
Yeah.
Giving a big justification for this thing.
I think we have talked about SRUs in the past and the fact that there is a bit of bureaucracy around it, which has to be there in order to prevent just random, untested changes landing in what is supposed to be a very stable release. But it is possible to get updates into old stable releases. That's for sure. And I'm sure for desktop applications, Martin can find someone who could help.
I may know a few people. Yes. So, Damon, two things. Yeah, I'll take a look at that bug and see what we can do to help you. And second of all, fan of your work. I'm a user of Rapid Photo Downloader. So thank you very much for all that you do on that project. It's rather terrific. Matthew Robinson emailed us.
I was curious to know, what are the areas that Ubuntu needs the most help with? I've read the excellent discourse post by Popey, and while that gives direction for things like updating the wiki, it's not as clear for more technical users.
This is a good question.
It is.
I think it depends who you ask as to what needs help, because everyone has their own perspective on, the bit that they see. I could personally say, something I would love to have the time to do is ... And there's like half a dozen things on that list that I just don't have time to do that I would love to get help with. But if you ask someone who works on the archive, it'll be a completely different set of things. And if you speak to someone in QA, it will be another set of things. So I think, as always, it really depends on where your skills are. It's very difficult for us to say, well, we really need someone to write documentation if that's not the thing that you're interested in doing. Like, if there are things that you're already skilled at, like if you were a Ruby developer, then we could point you in one direction. But if you were a C++ developer, we might point you in another direction. So it's a hard question to answer without knowing the background of the person. It almost needs like an interview with the person to discover what their motivations are and what their skills are, to figure out where the best place for them to apply themselves is.
Maybe we should put some kind of wizard together that people can go there and click some buttons and say, I can do this, I'm interested in this. And then it tells you, you should do this thing.
We did have one of those.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was Mozilla Project had one. And I think Fedora have one as well, which is like a flow chart of, show me stuff I could do. And you just have two buttons on the screen. You just press one and eventually it takes you down a path. It's like a flow chart that takes you down a path. And at various points you can exit out and say, no, I don't want to do that. Or no, that's not my areas of skill. And it takes you further back up the tree and tries to get you to somewhere. But it wasn't super well used. I don't know if it just wasn't well architected or wasn't well promoted. I don't know. It'd be lovely to bootstrap that again and help point people at stuff that needs doing, for sure. There's a task.
Yeah, right, exactly. So there you go, Matthew. That's what Ubuntu needs most, is a means of directing people to the way they can contribute to the project most effectively. Jorian Carstark emailed us about his favourite keyboard.
I use an Ergodox EZ. It's an absolute Cadillac of keyboards. Aside from being good for my wrists and fingers, the custom layouts and layers are super fun to use. Now, this is one of those split keyboards where, it's a split keyboard. I don't know what else to say. It's got a strange keyboard layout, and it looks like from the pictures on the website, the people are very great fans of this thing.
It really, really puts your thumbs to work, this keyboard.
Yeah, it looks like it. It's, yeah.
Can I ask each of you, have you ever tried one of these, ergonomic split keyboards?
No, I haven't.
Only on somebody else's desk when I used to work in IT support many years ago, and one of the early Microsoft ones. It wasn't the split one. It was the one that's got like the hump in the middle where...
Oh, the Microsoft one.
Yeah. So it wasn't completely split, and I just didn't take to it at all.
Yeah, I tried one for a month, but I couldn't get on with it. Something about it just doesn't compute for me. So, Robert Nanali emailed us about his favourite gadget.
My personal favourite hardware gadget is a Dell Mini 910, which I picked up on eBay for the purchase price and shipping of a total of $30. When I read on my laptop, I miss the tablet experience, less so for its touchscreen than for its size form factor. Enter the Dell Mini 910. I loaded Q4OS on it, installed e-reader software, and began a new reading life. The process of switching to publishers who use the DRM-free model has been far less restraining than I would have imagined. From the sci-fi of Tor Bane to the small press literary works of Cromer, Norfolk's Salt Publishing to Gutenberg.org, I found lots to read. In addition, Extreme Tux Racer acquires new poignancy on a 1.6 GHz Atom CPU. This netbook as an e-reader has emerged as a what-if idea that worked out perfectly. That's really quite cute. I haven't seen one of those Dells for a long time, those really old Dell Mini 9s. They're
Yeah. I miss netbooks.
Do you?
Really?
When I was at university, I used a netbook as my main machine. I wrote my dissertation and the software that went along with it on a netbook.
Wow.
So I've still got my Dell Mini 9. So if you want to see one, Alan, I'll pop it over to yours at some point. And netbooks are still having something of a resurgence right now. If you look at the likes of GPD, everything that they're pumping out is in the spirit of, the netbooks of old. And there's a number of other organizations making similar form factor devices. Yeah, I love my Dell Mini 9, even though the battery is long since dead. Jim emailed us about PS2 ports.
The gaming geeks that I know swear by mechanical keyboards and PS2 ports for better responsiveness and multi-key rollover. I'm not enough of a gamer to notice or care. That said, no one is getting my Model M.
So we had a few people, I say a few, our inbox was full of feedback about PS2 keyboards. Now, I am aware of multi-key rollover and all the rest of it. I feel like I hadn't made my point very clearly. It wasn't the technical reasons why PS2 ports are good. It's like why PS2 ports are being included on modern motherboards that are being manufactured in the current year. Because as far as I'm aware, all the current crop of sort of big brand mechanical keyboards are all USB or wireless. So that was my incredulity about this.
Yeah, it is a bit strange.
And finally, Mayak Bacchus emailed us.
Have you encountered situations where your kids go to high school and need a laptop? Our school now requires laptops, and both our kids are dyslexic, so are entitled to using the software Kurzweil 3000 provided by the school. But it's Windows or Mac only. When mailing school, I think they short circuit when reading the word Linux, since they never respond to my emails. Have you experience with this? And is this an area Ubuntu can focus to provide better support for kids? Educational software is one of those tricky places. Like, schools often don't have, in my experience, people who are technical enough that could, choose something that works on other platforms, or they just don't care enough about something because Microsoft is the dominant player here and everyone has Windows at some point. Now, that's changed a lot with Chrome OS and people doing stuff in a web browser. And it's also changed with iPads and doing a lot of stuff on touch-based interfaces. But I think part of the problem is the software is just not available. A lot of educational software was made for Windows, and a lot of those people are moving to the web so that it can be used and they can enforce subscription licenses and still get paid, long after they made the software originally. And also people are moving to touch-based interfaces for iPad. But because there isn't a ton of Linux workstations in schools, there's no market for those educational software vendors to make software for Linux. It's the chicken and the egg problem for, that we saw with games and we've seen with other software on Linux. Yeah, it would be great for people to bootstrap, more educational software on Linux, but I don't know about this specific use case, but in general, that's what I tend to find.
Yeah. And that rounds up all of your wonderful feedback. And there it was. That's it. That was episode 20. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week when we'll be discussing community news, goings on, and events. In the meantime, you probably want to subscribe to @Ubuntu Podcast on Twitter to stay informed of everything that's going on in the Ubuntu podcast world. And we'd like to say thank you to Joe Ressington for our podcast production services. And if you're seeking professional podcast consultancy or services, then find out more at joeress.com. Speak to you next time.